All right, do we want to configure SNMP? No, we don't. I'm just going to hit enter. And then it gives me a summary of the interfaces. Write down the list and enter the management interface from the network interface summary above. All right, so that would be interface VLAN 1, which we're going to use as our management interface. Do you want to configure IP on this interface? I believe it got an IP address from our server. It did. From our DHCP server, it actually grabbed an address. We'll go ahead and put an address on there anyways, though. So, yes, we do. And address we'd like 192.168.10.253. 254 is our actual router. All right, subnet mask. We'll just hit enter. We'll be talking a lot about subnet masks later. Would you like to enable cluster command on this switch? No, we don't. And then it spits out a configuration. So here's the configuration it would use to apply this configuration to our device. So we get to the very end of this, and normally I'd say save this configuration. Actually, truly, normally in my case, I probably wouldn't save the configuration because, well, I'm not that kind of guy. I generally don't like doing the setup script because it tends to do things I wouldn't normally do. Like, for instance, I wouldn't ever even put in an enable password on my devices. I would just use a secret password. I probably wouldn't set the remote password up because I'd use SSH as opposed to Telnet on my devices. So these are things that I'd have to go out and go fix anyways, so the script really doesn't help me in this particular case. So what I'm going to do is, instead of saying yes here and saving the configuration, I'm going to go ahead and exit out. Now, one thing you have to remember is if you save this configuration, it will overwrite the existing running configuration and then save it to NVRAM. There was a student of mine at one point in time. Let's save. I don't want to go back to iOS prompt without saving. 0. Okay. So you can type setup to get to the same spot. Now notice I typed enable and it just put me directly into a switch prompt. You can type the setup command and run through the same script. Now the problem was I had a student at one point in time thought that this was the way to configure things, and this particular student, she would do this on a device that already had an existing configuration, firewall, access lists, and a bunch of other really interesting things already in place. Of course, this setup script completely overwrites everything that's already on the device. So that can be quite disruptive to existing settings. Also, this thing keeps popping up with the auto config thing. So one of the first things I'm going to turn off is that whole auto config thing. All right, so let me show you the configuration mode on a router. So far you know about two modes, and that is user exec mode and privilege exec mode. The other mode you need to be intimately familiar with is configure terminal, which usually I will shorten all the way down to CONF space T. You'll see me type this a lot. All right, so configure terminal. Notice the command prompt. I'm now sitting in switch config. From the switch config prompt, I can start configuring things that affect this switch as a whole. And the first thing I'm going to do is a no service. I believe it's just auto config. The command on the router is no service auto command. It's no service config on the switch. That's what I was looking for. So no service config will shut off that process that it's doing right now. Beat me to it. That's sending a TFTP broadcast out looking for a file called network-confg to update the configuration for this device. So we shouldn't get any more of those messages. The other thing that's rather annoying, I'm going to turn off some of the Cisco annoyances here first off, and that is the fat finger issue within iOS. If you type something like, blah, doesn't really matter, and hit enter, it's going to send a broadcast out to all interfaces looking for a DNS server that's going to resolve this name. And we saw in the previous capture that it came back and would sit there and basically take my prompt away. And we had a DNS server configured because it learned it via DHCP. So that was even attempting to go somewhere and actually telnet over to a particular location, which could open up security issues. I even wrote a script to send to PSER, which is a Cisco Product Incident Security Response Team, to get them to shut this default off. And they told me that based on the security research that I did, that they were going to shut it off, but not in this version of code. So to turn that off, you need the command no IP domain dash lookup.